Hello and Happy New Year to all listeners. We are the Rams Review podcast. I'm Jason. Today we are joined by Nigel Owen. Nigel, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Well, yeah, New Year.
Yeah, certainly. And Jack. Jack's with us as well. Jack, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, guys. Yeah, do you know what? I'm just glad that we've still got our roles here with all the sackings that have kicked off in football over the last 24 hours. Man United, Celtic, Aberdeen yesterday. Blimey, it's been a few.
Yeah, it
I
has.
did worry, Jack. Jack, I did worry with you being in Orange that you were still in this country. You hadn't been helicopter lifted out, but I've been assured you are.
I am.
Yeah, it has. It's been a very interesting first 4 or 5 days of 2026 for football globally, as some of the big boys, as you can may call them, have lost managers. And it's been a bit of a funny old 2026 already for Derby County. Very Derby County like. Two games to talk about on this week's podcast before we look to the FA Cup clash at Pride Park on Sunday against old enemy Leeds United. And I think that the underlying theme to the first two games, Nigel, we said it on the podcast last week. Derby had to try and win one out of the two, which is what they did. A 1-0 win against Middlesbrough on New Year's Day, backed up by a 2-1 defeat yesterday at home to Wrexham. And I think you could arguably say Derby played probably better yesterday against Wrexham and didn't get the 3 points. So plenty of cliches, I'm sure, coming on the podcast as always. But that is just the championship, isn't it? I mean, we'll focus on Middlesbrough first. And it was a very similar sort of rinse and repeat to the 1-0 victory that Derby County had in against Middlesbrough in last season at Pride Park to pick up their first win. Not really in the game, didn't really do anything. One moment of quality, Derby take the lead. And all in all, as they've struggled a little bit all season, Middlesbrough just couldn't find the shooting boots.
Yeah, I think it was one of those days where, for once, somebody's bad run didn't come to an end against Derby County. They'd struggled to score goals coming into that game. Ironically, they actually scored several yesterday. They did again look like a side who looked very competent until they got in and around Derby's penalty area, and then just almost us looking in the mirror, because it's been the case with Derby on several occasions this season. Just haven't quite looked to have that cutting edge since we've not had the services of Carlton Morris. And you wonder how we're going to score at times. With Middlesbrough, it was almost that case. They almost, they'd done everything else right. If you went through the stats of that game, you'd find it difficult to believe that they couldn't score, particularly in the first half. But Derby, credit to the resilience of the defence. I think, that's something that came out of the Birmingham game and the Middlesbrough game is, when it's backs to the wall, actually, that's sort of when Derby perform best. It's almost when we've got to go forwards and be on the front foot and showing with the records comparably at home and away that we seem to struggle a bit. And a Middlesbrough side coming at us, trying to score but struggling seemed to be the right recipe for us then to go on and get the 3 points that we felt we needed from at least one of those two games, as you say.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to defensive performances over the two games because, yeah, they were slightly chalk and cheese, but we'll touch on the latter in a little while. But you're right, Derby defended valiantly, did what they had to do. There was a bit of a battling performance, but in all honesty, there just wasn't a lot of football on show. And Jack, let's be honest, if it hadn't have been for Zetterstrom in goal, and we know that that's what he's for, obviously, that's what your goalkeeper's for. But Derby should have probably been 3-0 down after about 15 minutes. That just goes to show the way that Middlesbrough were barricading Derby a little bit in that first half. And then as we see it so many times, if football's, I suppose it's a simple game, you have to score when you're on top because when you don't, um, you then other things can happen. And Derby, I don't know about grew into the game. Middlesbrough seemed to just run a little bit of out of ideas, and it was another one of them games where you just felt that moment of class would potentially get you something out of the game, and that's pretty much what happened with the first real foray forward, and it's a lovely finish. There's no two ways about that. But that real first bit of quality in the entire game, and luckily Derby could see it out.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to. you've got to remember that Borough are obviously right off at the top end of the league, and you feel after watching that they're a top finisher away from joining Coventry and running away with these automatic promotion places the way they were created. But yeah, I mean, Kim Hellberg was a very frustrated figure. I can tell you, as you can probably imagine, in the post-match press conference, because they should have killed the game off. Stat from the Borough local journos that I got is across the Derby game and the three previous, Borough had had 70 shots, only 15 on target, and not scored once. So you know, that's what Derby were coming up against. As you say, fortunate that the run that bad run for them didn't come to an end until yesterday against Southampton. But yeah, Zetterstrom does his job brilliantly with some of the saves, consistency there. I think we were fairly confident that he'd be reliable in those situations, and he was. But the goal, as you say, is really Derby's one bit of quality, and it comes in part because the substitutions have actually made an impact in this case, which we couldn't say after Leicester. Salverson has a bit of a presence up front, sold the ball up. Brereton Diaz added a bit more presence on that right flank alongside Joe Ward, whereas a lot of Derby's attacks have been coming down the left, as admittedly that did with Callum Elder's ball, but all the work to get into that final third came down that right flank. So Elder plays that brilliant ball into Salverson, and that was the only pass he completed all game, by the way, as he just kind of knocks it through to Bobby Clark and jumps out his way. And Bobby Clark, the great finish, deserved first Derby goal for his performances. He had been touch and go for the game. It was amazing, really, according to John Eustace. And yeah, after that nasty knock to his knee, he had a scan, nothing had shown, and yeah, he says he's ready to go. He's playing a bit further forward over those couple of games as a 10 or an 8. Um, but what I do think is notable, and I put these to John Eustace actually, is some numbers on his defensive capabilities, even in those performances, in those more attacking roles, because he had the joint most tackles and the most duels won whilst playing as a sort of 8/10. So I think we're seeing a benefit from that defensive discipline that's been added to his game, and now he's adding goals as well. So even better.
Yeah, I almost started the podcast, Nigel, as 2026, the year of Ben Brereton Diaz, because he's done more in 70 minutes of football in 2026 than he'd possibly done the previous 25 games, 24 games in a Derby shirt. And Jack's right, it was him, and we've been saying it for weeks about just taking him out the firing line a little bit. And obviously he came on and he really did make a difference against Middlesbrough. He was putting himself about. He was running about. Obviously, we'll go on to his performance against Wrexham in a little minute. But like Jack alluded to, we've said it, and again, something we've said far too many times. I think it's probably just where we are as a club at the moment. If Derby get a bit of joy off the bench, they tend to get decent results. When the bench doesn't impact the game, Derby don't tend to get results. And I think we've actually, over the two home games so far, we've probably seen both sides of that and the arguments for that quite clearly, haven't we?
Yeah, and I think it's something if you look at the sides that are towards the top of the division, the quality in the bench, certainly the top two or three sides, your Coventry, Ipswich, Middlesbrough, when you look at who they've got on the bench and compare it to where we've been at Derby, at the times when we've had players out injured, it's been fair to say we've probably been scraping around to find nine to put on the bench. There've probably been some players who are on the bench for the experience, but the likelihood of them ever actually coming on means they could probably sit on the bench and not have any socks on for a while. That's how likely they are to come on. But yeah, Ben Brereton Diaz came off the bench and not just with the ball, but did some very sensible, smart, clever things, winning free kicks to calm things down when we'd gone ahead. Yeah, and all of a sudden you saw in that period there exactly what John Eustace would have seen in him and wanted from him. And then maybe it's just that bit of confidence that then kicked on um, to the game and the goal against Wrexham.
Yeah. So I think obviously just before we move on to Wrexham, Jack, you mentioned it last week, and it was a pretty important stat that Derby were what one win in seven, and it had almost crept upon us because there obviously are a hell of a lot of draws in there, but that isn't what wasn't good reading, and so it was really important for Derby at least to try and start 2026 with the back-to-back home games of getting something. And as I say, maybe you'd think you'd win them the other way around, but buoyed by everything that we've just talked about, the confidence of the clean sheet, and not a blistering performance, but one where they have to stick in against a team who are second in division and, like we said, blew Southampton out the water yesterday. So, we've got to understand that it's a solid performance and a solid result. And then, yet again, something that we've said too many times this season, Derby then, you would think, go into yesterday's game against Wrexham with confidence. And within the first 5, 10 minutes, we couldn't even get a foot on the ball. Um, Wrexham knocked on the door, probably should have scored a couple of times themselves. In fact, it was a cracking game for the neutral. I thought, certainly for the first half, it was very end to end. Hit them. They had a chat. They had a spell. Derby had a spell, and it was just as Derby had started and got that flurry of corners, just started to turn the screw, that yet again we concede what is a very, very soft goal, and that all that confidence just seemed to zap out of them again a little bit, um, and your backs to the walls again, and that is just, as I'm sure we can all admit, too many times are we going behind in games, and we know what that record is. And of course, yesterday we didn't change that record as Derby ended up, although equalising, losing 2-1. But just that opening from Wrexham, I don't want to take anything away from Wrexham because obviously they're a side. I think that's 4 wins in a row, or might even be five now, off the back of Derby's game. They are scoring goals for fun. Smith up front looked a real handful all game. I thought his movement was fantastic. But again, I don't think Clark covered himself in glory a lot yesterday. I don't think Langas covered himself in glory yesterday. Again, just too many people at the back having a day off, which obviously isn't going to help when the team. I thought Wrexham. That's one of the teams that have really come to Derby this season with a style, with a way of playing, and Derby struggled to handle Wrexham yesterday, in my opinion. I know we ended up getting back into the game with a wonderful goal from Diaz, which we'll talk about in more detail in a minute. But just for the whole 90 minutes, again, other than that goal and possibly one other opportunity, there's just not enough that the Wrexham keeper's having to do. And so, yeah, we stay back at the second game of 2026, looking at it and just wondering why, from such a positive result against Middlesbrough, couldn't Derby replicate it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the opening stages of that game, it it felt like Borough all over again, didn't it? With the number of chances that were coming. I mean, couple for Nathan Broadhead early on. Uh, Sam Smith heads it's wide for a great position as well. And as you say, Derby started to come back into it. Bobby Clark had a chance from a very similar position to his goal on Thursday, and that goes in. Who knows what it looks like? But instead, Derby wrestled their way back into the game after 25 minutes to the point where Wrexham's lead feels not necessarily completely against the run of play, but it didn't feel inevitable at that point. Um, Sam Smith turns Matt Clark and he just slides to finish at that near post. Matt Clark failing to stay with him, and yeah, it's just moments, isn't it? I think Matt Clark has been a few question marks around for the last few games from some fans, and I don't think that'll do much to help. But to be honest, I think structurally and just in terms of performance, Derby were weaker at the back yesterday. So it's a frustrating goals conceded, and as you say, it's a good equaliser. And I think the thing you both said earlier about confidence with Brereton Diaz is true because if you look after what is a great drive from the left. From Matt Clark's pass, actually, he just eases past Dom Hyam and just slots it into the bottom right corner. What you see from there onwards is a rejuvenated Brereton Diaz, I dare say, as much as he didn't celebrate, because he's suddenly demanding the ball. He's suddenly trying to drive standards, trying to get Derby forward. He seems much more up for it. So I think confidence is the key. What's unfortunate for Derby is that as much as that clicked, as you say, things very much didn't at the back. Albeit the winner is a great goal.
Yeah, we'll move on to that in a minute. But I think Jack's spot on, Nigel. Confidence. I mean, in all fairness, confidence for Diaz to even take that on, because clearly there's a pass there to Adjiman, and I was holding my breath, hoping he'd pass it, knowing what sort of form Diaz has been in. But it takes self-belief and confidence that he could, and the way that he took that on, strode 20 yards, and he did just dance around the defence. Lovely little turn to open up the goal, and it's a very, very nice finish. And a finish that you probably wouldn't have. I know that Diaz can finish like that, but certainly with his confidence levels must be low. I think it's well documented. We've all spoken about it. Even John Eustace has sort of mentioned it without so many words in some of his interviews. But credit where credit's due. Brereton Diaz took that goal just as well as any other finish you're going to see this year.
Presumably now John Eustace has got to send him out and tell him we're playing Wrexham every week. Um, his goal at Wrexham and his goal at Derby is only two, goals of the season, both against Wrexham. So maybe there's something in that, and we can convince him that that's who we're playing every week. But yeah, look, I think the thing that perhaps surprised me, like you say, you saw Aggie Man there and thought, yeah, just square it to him, was we've seen him get into those positions quite a lot and then not be able to get his shot away or not get the final ball away. And that's been the biggest frustration, is that actually it's not that he's not been in games, he's been in games, but then the final contribution has not been good enough. So yesterday to see him step up, slot it like he did, was like, okay, this is great. It was almost like he found 10% more in his legs to be able to go that extra yard and get the shot away. Whereas before he's got in those positions and then the shot's been weak, or the pass has been off, or whatever it was. So yeah, look, great to see that. Yeah, the defensive side of things, like I say, on Saturday, like I said, sorry again, whenever day of the week it was now, Friday, Middlesbrough. Look, it was the backs to the wall defending we saw at Birmingham and at home against Middlesbrough just seemed to evaporate on against Wrexham. That was the strange thing, and it almost feels like, I don't know. John Eustace completely denied it in the post-match interview, which I thought was very interesting, saying that there aren't any issues in midfield. For me, that's where the biggest issue is for Derby right now. Whether by luck or judgment, we found that pairing of Clark and Ozo in there earlier in the season. That really worked, partly because we had Carlton Morris as well. You added Joe Ward into the mix, and all of a sudden we had a recipe to score goals as well as looking solid at the back. Since Ozo's injury, we've not quite found the pairing back in there. Adams doesn't quite give you the same passing ability. Thompson's tried hard. We've tried four at the back and three in the middle of the midfield. None of them have ever really given us a foothold in midfield, and it feels like either the defense gets exposed when they push forwards, or we're just not getting the link-up play, and the likes of Adjamang and Brewster are being left alone. And then neither of them are players that you want to play a long ball into, expect them to hold it up while players then get forward, which is why I find it surprising that Salverson hasn't had more of an opportunity again. Clearly not a John Eustace player, or we would have seen more of him. But again, yeah, the goal from against Wrexham, the equaliser, came from him being that last man, pushing right on there, knowing how to hold the ball up. Ultimately, it fell to Bobby Clark, but it was that him playing on the last man that I feel he's not the same type of number nine as Carlton Morris. So you have got to adapt the way you play. But he's an experienced number nine. He knows how to play that position. He's played that position for however many years he has coming through the system and playing it elsewhere before he came to Derby. And I just feel like Adjumang's done well. You can't criticise what he's done, but he's better coming from wide in the channel than he is playing straight down the middle. And I'd like to see Salverson back in the starting lineup. I'm not sure now whether I want to see him start against Leeds, which might mean that he doesn't get a start in the next league game, or whether he comes on and has another half an hour at the end and he's saved for the next league game. I'm not sure to get my head around that, but I think he needs another go up front if Carlton Morris is nowhere close to returning, which doesn't seem to be the case at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's almost a topic for after, but it brings it up now. I was gobsmacked in the second half. Obviously, Derby go 2-1 down with I mean, let's face it, let's call it what it is. It was a very poor ball out from the back by Langas, something that we don't expect. And in fact, he looks a little bit of a different player over the last couple of games. I don't know if this is all starting to catch up with him a little bit, because obviously it's very different to what he's used to. But it is a poor pass. It's still got to be finished. And I think it's even more. I mean, you might look at that. Some people might look at that and think, well, how's the goalkeeper not saved it? And I think that's probably quite the answer to that. If Zetterstrom couldn't save it, and we know how agile that man can be and how well he actually defends his goal, that's some special finish, Jack. And there's all questions about obviously closing down, and we talk about that week in, week out. Derby do seem to just allow the forwards the pick of the pass, the pick of the ball, and the pick of the angle. And I think sometimes that actually can be because they have got confidence that Zetterstrom is a very solid goalkeeper, and he definitely makes more regulation saves than other goalkeepers in the Championship. I think that's fair to say. He's got to be up amongst the top goalkeepers in the Championship just from some of the saves that he can pull off. But alas, we've just allowed them the space, and he's whipped in a fantastic goal. There's no two ways about it. And then for the next 35 minutes, Derby, very much like what you've just said there, Nigel, we've hoofed it up front, hoping somebody's going to basically try and win a knockdown against Brewster, who's probably 5'9", and Patrick Adjaman, who we've already seen at 6'4". Although he can score with his head, doesn't necessarily use his head all that much, and he was brushed off the ball far too easily on more than one occasion yesterday. And then I'm just looking at a stat. I've got a stat for you this week as well, Jack. Remarkably, I'm just looking back. If you think back to the last 5 or 6, 7 goals that Derby have scored, when did we last score from a punt up front and we've then turned that into a goal scoring opportunity? We haven't. The goal on the goal yesterday was on the floor. The goal against Middlesbrough technically is on the floor. The goal against Leicester a couple of weeks back is on the floor. The goal against Birmingham Boxing Day, it comes from a ball on the floor. It's not necessarily long ball football that we're scoring goals from, other than obviously you add your set pieces into that. So why is it that for 35 minutes, when you're chasing the game at home, do we decide to just play hoofball again?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and something I'm going to have to look into that in more detail now and look through non-set piece goals and see because I'm trying to think of one. Um, and there isn't one that comes to mind. It's something that was frustrating me on New Year's Day actually as well because Agyman was flicking it on and he was flicking it on to no one, right? And that's something we saw in the first few weeks of the season for Carlton Morris to win all his aerial duels. There's no one up there with him, and I think that's part of where Agyman comes into his own on the left hand side because he's got the pace and the power to get onto it and just kind of bulldoze his way through. It's something that I pinpointed before we'd even signed him, right? I was looking through the data going, his aerial numbers for someone who's 6'4" are not there, really. Um, so yeah, I think Salverson is is the guy for that. I mean, just going back to Wrexham's goal, it's ironic really because for as awful as the Derby defending is, Matthew James' finish is as good as the defending is bad. But yeah, Derby could have done with just an ounce of that again, couldn't they? Going forward themselves, and yeah, it's just not quite clicking up front at the moment. I think in Ryan Brewster, you've got someone who can produce a amount of magic that probably no one else in the Derby squad can at his best, but it's getting that to be consistent, and that's the kind of punt they've taken on him. I think I think yeah, the aerial presence is of Carlton Morris is best replicated by Salverson, but you've got to reconfigure your forward line to make that all click still. So it is an interesting one, but yeah, why lump it long when you've got when you've got Ajivang and Brewster who don't really seem to, as you say, kind of come into their own in that area of play. As you said, on the floor, Ajivang chases, great. He'll use his strength there to beat the defender. Um, but yeah, I think that is a really valid question, and whether that is Derby wanting to instill a style of play that they can stick with, I don't know, because everything we're hearing is that they want more of the ball. So they can't be married to this long ball strategy long term. Um, so yeah, it does seem a bit of an enigma.
Nigel, I think when you look at it, I mean, Agyman got down the left-hand side yesterday a fair few times. Corey Blackett-Taylor, when he came on, managed to get down that left-hand side again a few times. Diaz and Ward linked up two or three times. Didn't always come off perfectly, but there was definitely some of those. And we're running and putting balls in, which is obviously what you need to be doing. So again, it just adds to this why it's almost when 70 minutes 80 minutes hits and Derby have got to make something happen to get back into the game, they lose. I don't know if it's a little bit of composure. We know what final 10 15 minutes of games can be when you're chasing it. Obviously your tactics almost go out the window, but maybe that is time for that little bit of composure, for that stick to the game plan, because it was working. We put in balls yesterday. There was two or three that just didn't quite um, drop to a Derby player on from a set piece or from a cross or a clearance, and it's just that little bit of luck, that rub of the green, and a ball falls to a Derby player 8 yards out, and I'm sure we'd have ended up getting the equaliser. But just alas, it didn't just happen yesterday. But maybe we've just got to stop going a little, that long route one. I'm not sure it's really helping Derby at the moment, because no sooner do we punt it up front and obviously we don't get hold of it. One of the biggest problems against Middlesbrough on New Year's Day was how fast again that ball was repelling back to the defence. And we say it week in, you're not going to win football matches if you're going to give up possession as easily as that.
Yeah, and I think part of that is, I've seen people saying that, after players that are a little bit tired, and people say, oh, yeah, but the schedule's the same for all clubs. It is, but you're less tired when you have 60% of the ball than when you've got 35% of the ball, right? Chasing around the ball is a tiresome exercise in football. Passing the ball around is much easier than doing doggy's work, chasing it around the pitch. Yeah, I mean, it felt a little bit. I don't know. The substitution felt a little bit desperate and panicked. Throwing four players on that it wasn't ever quite obvious how all four fitted into the system. I saw somebody say it looked a little bit sort of Sunday League of let's just put everybody on up front and see what happens. And it felt a bit sort of messy like that. Like you say, in a game where we were only 2-1 down and we were creating chances, it felt like we went a little bit too gung-ho. And I think if anything, we were lucky that Wrexham were quite hit and miss really on the break. They had a lot of breaks, 1-on-1, 2-on-1, 2-on-2, 2-on-3, where they didn't have the composure that Brereton Diaz had. They didn't find the last pass. Zetterstrom made good saves where, there must have been Wrexham fans going, this is good. We can see what's happening here. We've seen it as Derby fans. You miss, you miss, you miss. And then somebody picks you off in the 91st, 92nd minute. They'll go away thankful it didn't happen. Derby perhaps would have considered it lucky had we got one in the end, given how many of those breakaway chances we'd given up. But it just feels a little bit like we're back to the early stage of the season where it's either we all defend and we're back to the wall and we can't find a way out, or we're going forward, which exposes at the back, and we're going to have to win games 3-2, 4-2, 2-all draws, that kind of thing again, which again brings me back to that suggests the midfield can't get on the ball, can't control the game, can't transition well enough to mean that we can do both ends of the pitch well. And I know we've got injuries out there before anybody says, look, we're missing Ozo. I think Travis, when he came on the other day, I thought showed some composure in there. And again, the potential. Be interesting to see how he's used against Leeds versus coming back in potentially to the starting lineup in the next few weeks. Yeah, but it does feel. I know that we've been very proud of Curtis Davis's charts on Sky the other week of how clinical we've been in front of goal. But I just think unless you've got Erling Haaland in your side, um, those sorts of stats eventually revert to the mean. And I think the danger is that we're going to see that soon, that we're not going to be able to keep up that level of finishing from the few chances that we'd had. We're equally so not going to be able to keep the clean sheets we've consistently been having. I think, do you know what? In the last two games, Wrexham to me looked like one of the best sides I've seen at Pride Park this season. I'll admit that. Middlesbrough looked decent for a side that should be up there, just couldn't finish. But if we're looking at this now, saying we've come through halfway in the season, the frustration for me is looking at the sides that are in the top three and thinking, do you know what? We haven't got to improve much to be up there challenging with the Prestons, the Millwalls, the Watfords of this division. We've seen them and matched ourselves against them. And from actually some of the poor performances we've seen, particularly at home, we should be able to lift ourselves that little bit that it needs to compete in the last 20 or so games of the season and give ourselves a chance of being up there. And I think that's what's the biggest frustration right now for Derby fans is, you know what, this league is not being dominated by the three that came down and Sheffield United with their parachute payments, that it's going to be very difficult to go up. There's going to be a side, well, there's going to be two or three sides in the playoffs this year who are not going to spend much more than Derby. And that doesn't happen very often in this division. So I kind of hope that Oscar Fraulo is the first of several shrewd signings that we make that give us a bit more.
So as we now turn attentions to FA Cup third round action and the draw has pitted us against an old enemy in Leeds United at Pride Park next Sunday. I'm not really sure, Jack, what to think about this draw. Let's face it, it's going to be hard pressed for Derby to get anything out of it. We don't obviously know what kind of a side Leeds are going to put out, who aren't doing too bad in the Premier League at the moment, but that's probably their focus, obviously, is survival. Normally, it's obviously the cup games where we say, do we give a couple of the squad players a run out? But of course, we're kind of running on a skeleton squad. So, what's your opinions and what would be your thought process in how we go about going into this game on Sunday? For me, I think the likes of Blackett, Taylor, Salverson, Jackson, possibly Travis if he's ready. I believe Ozo's back in training, probably comes too soon for Sunday, but it'd be nice to get him back on the bench. Maybe a Nelson, maybe a Bat, that force. There probably is changes that Derby could make. And I think after such a busy Christmas schedule, and then as we're going to look into for the final couple of minutes of the podcast, Derby's next 4 or 5, we have got some very, very difficult games in there. Maybe it's just one for the squad rotation Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think the fact it's Leeds specifically presents a dilemma for us as fans, less so for management, right? They will have a bit of a strategy, you would think. They will know that some of these players, your Salversons, your Langases, your Adjumans, haven't played a packed festive schedule that we are so proud of here in England before, right? And they will know kind of who needs a bit of a rest. I think Lewis Travis feels like a shoe-in if he's ready, even if he was say playing the first half of the first 60 minutes. It feels like a good time to bring you in, captain for a big game like that. Bit of experience at the back would not go amiss as well, and I do think we might see Salverson. Just again, if Derby are going to have little of the ball and need to go long ball or feel they need to go long ball, then that would feel sensible. I mean, this is a draw that looks a damn sight harder than it did when it was made as well, right? Because of Leeds' remarkable run in the Premier League. I mean, if Dominic Calvert-Lewin plays, they're a completely different proposition. So some of it will come down to how much they rotate. But yeah, I'd expect a few changes, but I think we might still have the core of a first team. Probably sort of 50-50 would be the way I would go about it. Keep these Zetterströms because Josh Vickers has been absent from the bench the last couple of games, and I don't see them throwing Richard O'Donnell in for this one. keep one or two of the back three the same, throw an experienced head or two in, and then yeah, maybe I think the wing backs will probably stay the same just because I don't know how soon that would be for Max Johnston as well. But yeah, I think Travis next to Clark, and then refresh that front line a bit with one or two changes, and you're kind of there. But it's I mean, it should be an exciting occasion. And the other thing is, guys, it's my biggest test yet because in terms of the games I've done, if there's a game where I'm going to want to be cheering, I'm going to want to be chanting, it's going to be this one, isn't it? So let's see if I can keep myself relatively neutral on Sunday. I'll report back next week.
Yeah, they're going to be backed by about 5,500, Nigel, which is, I don't wish to see 5,500 Leeds fans in one place, let alone in my own stadium. But yeah, it does build up for an atmosphere, and it's one of those where, let's face it, Leeds have, other than one fantastic night 5 or 6 years ago, Leeds have definitely had the better of Derby County over the last 10 years. With them previous 10 years, Derby I think went unbeaten, didn't they? So yeah, they've managed to dish out a little bit of revenge, but Premier League opposition coming in the cup, maybe not the biggest glamorous tie. I suppose for fans, they've got to be happy that it's at home and it's not a 250-mile round trip to a Scunthorpe or a Colchester away in the cup or something like that. I'd like to say, can Derby go out there and obviously just show what they're capable of doing on the TV? But as we've seen over the Christmas period, Derby have been far too hit and miss. It, and as we say, the squad is probably stretched to breaking point at the moment. I know probably making 11 changes, even if they were possible, it would be unfair on the fan base who've paid for the tickets and etc. I just think for me, it's one of them games that, in all honesty, Derby could probably do without with. Although I know it obviously brings in revenue in for the club. It's just one of them games that I think Derby could do without at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because given who Leeds have played or will have played by then, having played Liverpool, Man United, they're away at Newcastle on Wednesday night, and then they sort of start to think about Derby. There's a little bit of you that says, do you know what? They're probably going to change quite a bit in their side from that. They actually played, a midweek game that Derby won't have played. We've got the luxury of having a week off before and a week off after. So there's almost an element that wonders if John Eustace might look at that and go, you know what, everybody's had a week off. We've got a week off afterwards. There's no need to go the sorts of changes that we saw at Burnley, say in the League Cup, where we did see the likes of Jake Rooney playing, Ben Osborne playing. At the time, the out of favour Joe Ward, Caden Jackson even started that one, I think. So yeah, I like to think the changes are, as Jack said, experienced people, capable people. So, just bringing Travis in weakeners, you'd hope that it strengthens us actually. Does salve some weakeners? I think it's a different approach, but I think it leaves us equally effective. Does Curtis Nelson come in? I think, on the back of what he showed at Birmingham, he's been unfortunate not to be closer to a start since then. So, I think those sorts of changes actually, don't necessarily weaken Derby squad, but they're a good rotation, a chance to get minutes into those legs of players who are coming back, and dare I say, time in view for players who people might be looking at moving on in the window. Corey Blackett-Taylor, for example, Curtis Nelson, may want to play first team football somewhere rather than be sat on the bench at Derby. It's putting people in the window that might help as well. So yeah, you always, when you play against Leeds, you want to put out the best team, particularly if you look at their side come kick-off time on Sunday and find that they've made 11 changes or something like that. You'd then be kicking yourself if we've not put a strong side out, at least, put it that way. And to some extent, it's a game where Derby haven't got anything to lose. So I'd like to think that we try and get some of those patterns of play back, some of that connectivity back that we saw early in the season that we've been struggling for in recent games, and see if we can get a connection between Travis and Clark that we had between Clark and Ozo, and see if that's something we can build on for the future league games, and go from there.
Absolutely. Well, a couple of bits of transfer news. as was almost reported last week on the podcast, we kind of knew it was going to happen, but we said we'd talk about it this week. Oscar Fraulo is Derby's first signing of January. Um, Maybe, just maybe, he makes the match day squad on Sunday, and he's given a 20, 30 minute period of just building his fitness up. I don't think it would be such a bad choice if I'm completely honest. I'm not saying throw him in there from the start for 90 minutes, but maybe we will see our January signing, Jack. But Oscar Fraulo, obviously box to box midfielder, something that I think Derby probably need. Looked at him last year. The fees were a million to 2 million. Looks like Derby's managed to pick him up for about 300 to 400,000 based on reports. But slightly worrying is that when we were looking at him, and I know there were other European and Championship clubs looking at him, doesn't seem like he's had the start of this season that he would have wanted in the Bundesliga for Mönchengladbach. So I don't know if that's a slight concern that we've signed somebody. Okay, he might not be for the here and now. He might be for more of a next season signing as such. But we are going to drip. I'm sure we'll drip feed him in. But for somebody who wasn't really getting into the side at Mönchengladbach, I suppose something similar in a Kenzo Houtman, where he obviously wasn't getting in for his parent club, was on loan to a side that was relegated in the Eredivisie. So bit of a strange one, but clearly this one looks like it's come from the football consultancy team or whatever. They've obviously clearly seen something about him. His facts and figures must tick boxes. So what? Come on, Mister Statman. What do we know about him?
Yeah, so I think box to box eight is was John Eustace's description, and I think let's start by breaking down why this signing appears to have happened. As you say, it appears to have come from the kind of recruitment team, and I think one of the key factors in this, and I wonder if this is part of what John Eustace was getting at in that post-match interview at Leicester, where you have got to consider that, of course, he's just lost what is somewhat of a derby, is that the guy's only played 40 minutes of football in the Bundesliga this season, albeit he has scored in that time, by the way, from Mönchengladbach. And of course, the Houtline comparison is fair in terms of looking at Utrecht and his form there, where the bulk of his numbers for the kind of last 365 days database profiles can come from. But of course, it's quite a small sample size because of those lack of minutes in the Bundesliga, which is a much higher level on paper than Utrecht's average games. So we do have to factor that in. I mean, I think the other thing with this is it makes business sense in terms of the fact that Derby's two young, promising midfielders at those low knees at the moment. So you bet this guy in, and maybe he's a long-term successor to a Bobby Clark or a David Ozo for next season. Maybe you can get one of them back and he plays alongside them. That's probably the ideal. Well, the ideal is maybe both of them even. But yeah, what we know is in terms of his numbers per 90, he's in the 96th percentile for non-penalty goals. This does factor in his what do you call it? His Eredivisie numbers from the second half of last season as well. And non-penalty XGs in the 95th percentile as well. So he gets into positions, he creates good chances from not quite as many shots as well. So his XG kind of comparison is higher than his total of shots. So that's good. The 88th percentile for assists as well, and a decent number of shot creating actions. He receives a lot of progressive passes, which maybe suggests that he's quite an attacking figure, certainly in where he's played previously. John Eustace describes it as box to box, but that would suggest to me that he receives the ball in relatively high positions if you consider progressive passes to be 10 yards in the opposition third. So I think that that could be exciting. He's someone who can drive Derby on, lots of touches in the attacking penalty area, 99th percentile there. 81st percentile for progressive carries as well. So in terms of kind of driving up the pitch, that would make sense in a box-to-box sense. Defensively, his tackle, block, and interception numbers are quite low compared to other midfielders, but his clearances are in the 79th percentile, and even aerials one is in the 77th percentile. So a bit of he can hoof the ball and he can get his head on it when needed. But yeah, I'd say he very much looks a kind of more attacking minded box to box eight based on how he's played previously. I wonder whether it might be a little bit like Bobby Clark in terms of trying to add that defensive side to his game. Just a quick one on kind of comparison of players. According to FBref, which is built off the Opta databases, the midfield comparisons in the 10 most comparable players, Luton's Jordan Clark is fourth, Victor Torp from Coventry fifth, and Wrexham's Lewis O'Brien 10th. So yeah, again, those sort of box crashing central midfielders. He does also have some comparisons as a winger, which I do think we have to factor in attacking midfield and wingers as to why some of those attacking numbers might be so high if he played out there for a bit of Utrecht and maybe tone it down. But very interesting on that is that the second most comparable player in terms of statistics over the last year to him as a winger is Tyree Dolan. Now that is something that John Eustace might be happier about than he maybe let on in that interview last week, because we know that there's a guy that he has made very, very effective in the past. But as I say, I think he'll be a box-to-box eight with, let's say good attacking numbers, some probably late runs into the box and that sort of thing. But yeah, build this defensive side of the game and help him adapt to the physicality of the Championship. And it could be a good signing. But of course, I think there will be fans a little bit worried when you look at Kenzo Houtmine and how that panned out in terms of Eredivisie signings. I mean, when was the last time Derby signed someone from the Netherlands, or someone that had played in the Dutch league, sorry, that took the lead like a duck to water? I am struggling to think of one. But yeah, numbers look decent, and I think that's what the recruitment team would have looked at. Potentially want to ease in, and I think John Eustace is maybe keener to have instant impact, to be back as the players he's already got that are coming back to fitness to do that, akin to Lewis Travis and David Ose.
At the end of the day, Nigel, I think you look at it, like we say, the reported figure of around 400,000. Obviously, we never really know exactly how much these deals go for these days. But it feels like it's one of those that a bit like the Kenzo deal, which doesn't seem to have worked out too well for Derby's side. It's not like you've spent the 5-6 million that they've almost took a punt on with Adjiman, is it? And let's face it, look how Adjiman's come in from, I'd say, a worse standard of football than probably what the Eredivisie is. No disrespect to the MLS, but it probably is. And whilst we can see the flaws of Patrick Adjiman, his numbers this season have been, pretty decent, and you would hope they're only going to get better once he does acclimatise even more to the Championship. So I suppose if this one doesn't come off, it's 500,000, whatever, which is still obviously a lot of money, but in football, in terms, let's face it, it's absolutely nothing. But if they do get a, dare we say it, Craig Bryson-esque sort of midfielder out of this for short, little change from 500,000, I mean, that's good business.
Yeah, and I think even with Kenzo Houtmine, although it's even not worked out for Derby, when I'm looking at briefly occasionally what he's doing back in Holland now, it feels like we'd get back what we paid for him anyway. So it's not been that much of a failure. It's not like, say, it's not like we paid 3 or 4 million for him. We're not going to get anywhere near that back. So yeah, these sorts of buys, there's a little bit of risk for them. Yes, he's not played that many minutes this season, but he has been on the bench pretty much every game for Borussia Mönchengladbach. So it's not that, he's not getting near the squad. So, if you're in and around the squad for a Bundesliga side that is pretty much mid-table in the Bundesliga, you're not a muppet, right? You go and look at the equivalent benches at Bournemouth, at Leeds on Sunday, and you're thinking, if you're getting a midfielder from one of those benches, I think if we'd gone and got somebody on loan from one of those, I think we'd be quite happy with what we're getting. it's not necessarily exactly like for like, but yeah, the Bundesliga is a decent league. To be in the bench on that, you've got to have a reasonable amount of talent. And for them not to let him go out on loan again at the start of the season, that perhaps would have been an easy option given what he'd done in previous seasons. So yeah, look, let's look at the positive spin. I've voiced it here a few times. My biggest fear coming into this window was an injury for Bobby Clark, that I didn't feel we had any cover in that position whatsoever. So if it does give an option there that perhaps when Bobby does get a knock on his knee, he isn't kind of almost forced to play because we've got nobody else to play there, gives him a little bit of leeway. Like I say, maybe we'll see him on Sunday. Give Bobby Clark 45 and give Oscar Fraulo 45, whatever that might be. I think, yeah, like I say, he should be fit and ready to go. Yes, he hasn't had game minutes, but if you're fit enough to sit on the bench week in, week out, he has been training, in a proper football club for the whole season. Presumably had a proper pre-season before that as well. So, yeah, he might need a little bit of time to get up to game speed, but it wouldn't be a surprise to see him play 45 minutes on Sunday. You wouldn't have thought. Yeah, there's got to be more to come in this window, but it feels like a positive sign to start with, and nice to get some business done early in the window.
Do you know
Yeah,
what it comes back to for me is in many ways a similar thing to what we're talking about in terms of rotation for Leeds. I think he's going to have a fitness level. If he's been on bench, he's been around the team. The question will be match sharpness, and I think that same balance might be what we come back to on Sunday. Because if John Eustace rotates too much, then you're going to have players who, yes, are getting the rest, but then they've not played a match in 2 weeks. And I think that's what they'll look to maintain with those players and look to build up with Fowler. So I think that might be one of the key considerations in the early stages of his Derby County career.
yeah, I think that's a fair point. Other transfer news, only 5 days into January, of course. Jake Rooney coming back from loan Jack, where I was reading about this the other day. Doesn't look like he's really been too involved. Um, and so it'd be interesting to see if Derby have recorded him or obviously he got sent back. Um, Again, not a Eustace signing. Eustace probably hasn't obviously seen a great deal of him due to his injury last season and obviously dripping in and out of pre-season, and then he got his move. I mean, do we honestly now? I mean, that's what, 3, 4 years now he's been at Derby. Do we honestly think that there's much of a future for Jake Rooney, and that could be one of the reasons why he's been pulled back, because it is potentially a player that we might just be able to get a couple of 100,000 for and balance us against the Fralo transfer.
I mean, I can tell you for one, I'm pretty sure the Bardsley statement said that they had exercised the option to cancel the loan, which is somewhat telling in the first place. I mean, he's somebody who has always had that bit of class on the ball, versatile in centre back, right back, midfield, supposedly as well. And he looked solid when he played, say, at West Brom in the Carabao Cup. And I think that kind of sums him up. He's always looked solid, always looked composed on the ball, but he's never had a run. I mean, I go back to Paul Warren's first season when we played MK Dons away, I believe it was, in around November time. And Paul Warren was asked about Jake Rooney, and he said, yeah, he's not for the foot wrong, but there's just people ahead of him. And that was after another performance that was pretty much flawless. He'd just done his job and done it well, but he just couldn't break through the players ahead of him. And I feel like obviously injuries have certainly not helped him with that. It feels like that's where he is now. If he's played for Derby and Barnsley, I mean, you'll be able to come in on this, Nigel. Can he play for another club this year? I'm not sure he can this season in England, at least. Can he?
No, FIFA have their three club rule, and once you've played senior games for two clubs, you can't then go and play for a third club. So we do have that sort of problem. The probably three loans this season that we've loaned players out so far, none of them seem to have worked out for player or club really. DeJean Brown has not had much game time at Port Vale. And Daniel Cox as well, who's been out at Walsall, has played, I think it's 7 games, half of which were in the Football League Trophy, so technically don't count as senior games. But they've all now played at another club. Daniel Cox hasn't actually played for Derby, so he could go out on loan and play somewhere else. But because Jake Rooney and DeJean Brown featured in League Cup games, I think it was earlier in the season, they've now played for two, so they can only play for. So Jake Rooney could only play now for Derby, or go back to South Yorkshire, which it doesn't sound like he will. And I say, if they record DeJean Brown, he can't go anywhere other than sit on the bench for Derby because he's played for Derby and Port Vale. So yeah, there is a little nuance in there in that he could go somewhere where they play summer football. So Ireland, Finland, the MLS, the A League in Australia, but it's a limited bunch really if you want to get them decent for team football and be able to keep an eye on them, which you normally do on loan spells. So yeah, Derby's loan management of players perhaps an area that needs looking at for future seasons. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see, because really now Jake Rooney goes into a pot of, well, with him coming back, four right backs. He's now fourth in the queue behind Ward, Johnston, Nyambi. You can't see him being named in a 25-man squad come the end of the month. I would have thought that Nyambi would be on his way out as well, or certainly not in the 25, given the prominence of Joe Ward this season and Mac Johnston coming back. Is there any point in bringing DeJean Brown back? I don't think so, but it's not really. It's going to feel like another wasted season for him if he's not getting game time at Port Vale, which it doesn't look like he is. So, yeah, I don't know who's been behind those loans and who manages it, but it doesn't look like anybody's really getting the benefit out of those.
Yeah, it's something as well worth noting is that Dan Cox has returned from his loan at Walsall this afternoon. It's been announced. The club announcing it with the line. He made a total of 7 appearances across EFL competitions to sort of combine those EFL trophy appearances with league appearances, presumably, in that. So yeah, he's back as well now. I imagine he'll go back to the under-21s because, as you say, it's hard to see another viable option. And of course, we talk about Jake Rooney. We talk about him not being able to break through. That line's been reinforced now, hasn't it, with the permanent signing of Dion Sanderson, which only counted as a January transfer because it would have had to be registered permanently come the 1st of Jan, but it was also announced in December. So I don't know quite where that one sits, but yeah, that's an interesting one. And in terms of fees as well, that could be a shrewd bit of business, could it not, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. You are spot on. My apologies to Dion Sanderson. He technically is Derby's first January transfer. I think one that we all have kind of said on the podcast. It made financial sense. It made squad number sense. It made loan position sense. Which begs the question, I suppose, Nigel. Then we have opened up that loan spot. Obviously, keeping his cards close to his chest. Of course, he is. Why would he come out in a press conference and say, yes, we're getting such and such on loan next week? You're not going to do that. They've clearly freed that loan space up, expecting to, I would assume, bring somebody in somewhere. Obviously, there's been reports Derby are chasing. Names completely escaped me at the moment, but a left back at the moment on more of a permanent deal rather than a loan deal. Dallo, isn't it, or Darlow, however you pronounce his name, I think it is. Um, so you would assume if they've turned that one permanent, they must have something in the pipelines to bring somebody in on loan.
Yeah, and don't forget we've also freed up the loan spot of Owen Beck as well. So that's two loan spots that have become available. It feels like doing that so soon suggests that you would have something lined up for at least one of those loan spots. I know a few people got excited when Harrison Armstrong went back to Everton, but he's subject to the same rules that Jake Rooney is. So the only place he can go back out if he does is go to Preston or remain in the first team squad at Everton. Discussion seems to be that he may actually just be helping Everton out with their squad while they've got players away at the AFCON and then may get released back to Preston at the end of the month. We'll see how that plays out. But yeah, he won't be coming to Derby anytime soon. Yeah, be interesting to see now. Like I say, with Fraulo coming in, do we need any more loan in midfield? It doesn't feel like the midfield needs strength. The emergence of the true Ben Brereton Diaz, Blackett Taylor, again, in that half-hour cameo he had, showed what he can do. And I think we're all frustrated that we've never really seen that pre-season Blackett Taylor that we saw this year. That was the great hope that we thought this is it. We're finally going to see him. Can we finally get that in the second half of the season? That'd be a great asset if we can do. Or is now just the time to say, thanks a lot. You've just not been fit enough. Let's go from there. In which case, are we looking at a winger? Does Brereton Diaz's turn in form coincide with these rumours about him going to Toronto or wherever it is, and he's put himself in the shop window, and we might not have him come February, and therefore we definitely are looking for a wide player to come in. It feels like we've got to get some cover at left back. Elder is another one of those who's looking leggy. It is hard work playing that wing back role. I think as Joe Ward alluded to in his interview. So it wouldn't surprise you if we're looking at another left back on loan or permanent, as you mentioned those rumours there. So I think wouldn't surprise me if we see a winger or a left wing back lined up in those loan spots. You never know. It may be that we're looking at lining up another centre forward, and it might be the end for Salverson. We'll wait and see. But again, it would be nice if we can get this business done sooner rather than later. I'm not too fussed if we don't get somebody in for Leeds, but it'd be nice to get somebody in for 2 weeks' time for the next game, so they can at least sort of train with the squad ahead of that. And the eyes then will of course turn to how soon do we get Carlton Morris back, and how soon can he regain fitness. And the amazing thing is that he hasn't fallen too far down those top scorer tables in the Championship. Yeah, he's still got a chance of being out there. Amazing that he's still up there.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we know that we've mentioned a couple of players there. There are still 11 players out of contract in the summer that obviously Derby may look if there's deals available for them. John has said there's been inquiries about a couple of players. So yeah, I think again, I think left back, obviously he wants to replace because we've had to send one back. A winger, I would agree. Maybe even another option up front, I would agree. But then I think it'll all be about what other business Derby do outgoing as to letting, let's face it, you let somebody like a Caden Jackson go if there's interest and bring somebody in on loan from a Premier League, a youngster or whatever. Is he really going to do any different to what Caden Jackson's done for this Derby side this season? Because obviously he's just not really been involved, and of course then you're probably not paying as much in wages, etc., etc. So I think the two loan spots are probably more so to see what Derby then will need in probably 2 weeks' time, when if a bit of the market moves on players going out. But yeah, I'm no. There has been no other firm rumours at this moment in time. So until there is, we're not going to be reporting on anything like that. So hopefully, come next podcast, we might have a few more transfers to talk about. And that is it. So yes, we have, as we say, Leeds at home in the FA Cup on Sunday,
Sunday,
12:30 kickoff, is it?
12 o'clock, I believe.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
midday.
midday. There we
Yes, it
go.
is, because I know what time I've got to get there, and it's even earlier than normal.
And then, of course, we then turn our attentions back to league football, and what may well now be a tricky trip to Preston, who are obviously currently sat fourth at this moment in time, with actually Derby's next two games coming both away, a trip up north and a trip to the capital against Charlton. Any other business before we leave you on this episode?
Can we get
Yeah,
Jack
just
Marriott on loan for Sunday?
good shout. I mean, do you know what? There's just a couple more things that John used to said on Thursday after Borough on transfers that are worth just considering. I mean, he was, as you say, very coy on, not wanting to bring in players for the sake of it, and so on. But he did say that whilst the balance of the squad is okay, we probably still need a wide player. So I think that does reinforce what we're talking about with whether that's a left wing back or a sort of winger. To be honest, I could probably see both happening. I think you get a winger in, someone to play kind of in those two behind a striker, and then you get a squad replacement for what Owen Beck was meant to do, and bingo. The only other question, actually, Nigel, you might know this, so I've seen contrasting reports on it, is in terms of loan spots, Derby have loan spots free, but do they have spots free in the squad? Because Dion Sanderson's still one of the 25-man squad. You've got to get someone else out before you can use that loan spot in the squad still, if you're not.
Yeah, yes, you can only name 25 irrespective of the loan spots in there. So obviously we brought Curtis Nelson in for Owen Beck, so that was the 25 to 25. There's a little bit of an anomaly you could do in January in that actually you can change your 25 named players at any point in January without needing EFL approval. So you could, from game to game, actually change who's in the 25. So, you could leave Carlton Morris out of the 25 and bring in Jake Rooney, let's say, for 1 or 2 weeks, as long as you then put Carlton Morris back in before the window closes at the end of the month. There's a little anomaly around that. But otherwise, yes, players have got to go out of the 25 before we can bring them in. So yes, somebody's got to go out of the 25 for Oscar Fraulo to come in. As I say, you could leave Carlton Morris out for the next games in January and bring Fraulo in before you take anybody else out there. But looking at who has been in the squad, who hasn't been in the squad, who's likely to be the ones going out of there, I think probably perhaps Craig Forsyth drops to the B team player captain, something like that. I think particularly if we get a left wing back in, given that we've got the five centre halves in there. I think perhaps one of those centre halves. I think, I mentioned Curtis Nelson perhaps wanting to play football. Can't blame him at his age, but it feels like having him and Danny Bart in there as cover for the three centre halves feels a little bit excessive. Perhaps one of those could go. We've mentioned that Jake Rooney comes back as the fourth man in the queue. Wouldn't surprise me if Nyambi leaves in this window. Certainly, do you need to name three right backs in your 25? Probably not. And as you said, if we're getting wingers in, wouldn't surprise me if one of Jackson or Blackett Taylor leaves. Blackett Taylor, I still think is capable. It's just a fitness situation. Jackson tries hard, does his best, but isn't really of the level that we want to be if we want to be mid-table looking upwards.
Yeah, I think I would echo with all that. I mean, I know it's a quick turnaround, but Derby obviously have to look in these transfer windows and try and improve. Obviously, that's the name of the game. And like we say, there is still a smattering of League One players in that championship lineup. And let's face it, probably not a lot of them are really set in set in the division alight. So yeah, I think that transition of where Derby are now from 2 years ago, I think the likes of a Caden Jackson, possibly Nyambi. Although I think Nyambi's a very decent, really decent defender. I just think obviously we have recruited there. So yeah, I would agree with that. And like you say, the back line, do we need all that cover? But I would have to agree with you. It's probably if we've got replacements that can come in and potential and hope improve the squad, then yeah, I think the likes of a Forsyth might just have to take up his coaching coat and that kind of thing. I think.
One other thing they're in cover as well. I think I need to go back and look at the exact wording of the rules and regs on this, but I think Jake Rooney doesn't have to be named in the 25 because he's one of our own developed players at
Hmm.
the age he was. Therefore, he could actually give you extra cover at centre half and be the third cover at right wing back. That then mean you definitely could let Nyambi and one of the other centre halves go.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure there is a rule. Thinking to my football with my football manager cap on, I think there is a rule there where if they're trained at the club from a certain age, then yeah, it doesn't necessarily go against that. So, all I'm sure all will be revealed as we are only on the 5th of January. It feels like about the 25th. I must admit, this last few days has gone pretty slowly, but as January normally does. But we will be back next week. As we say, we'll have all the fallout from Derby's FA Cup game. We'll see if they're in the hat for the fourth round, and then we will look to preview those two away trips to Preston and down to Charlton as well. As January looks on paper a bit of a tricky month. Derby are going to have to find the more consistent side of their form that they've shown over December if we can kick on and still be in and around that mid-table top 10 position where I'm sure we all want us to be. Thank you very much for this evening, gentlemen. Nigel, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. And before you say up the Rams, I want to say up the Hammers for tomorrow night as well.
Absolutely. And Jack, thank you very much, mate.
Yes, thank you. We'll also hopefully have Loughborough Lightning versus Derby County Women to review for if the pitch is suitable this time as well. So yeah, a couple of games for next week.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's hope the weather holds off and we can get some more football in. That'd be lovely. Right, until next time, thank you very much for listening. We've been the Rams Review, and as always, up the Rams.